So my name is Tricia Carey, and we'll get started today. Welcome everyone for joining our webinar. We moved this online due to all of the times right now, and we're hosting this as a part of New York Circularity Week. And so today, as I mentioned, my name is Tricia Carey. I handle global business development at Lenzing. Lenzing is a man-made cellulosic fiber producer. If you're not aware, we make viscose, modal, and lyocell, which we brand as Tencel, and we'll talk more about that later. And I appreciate you joining today. Certainly, it's times that we've never seen before, and it makes us reflect even more on how we can lower the impact of our environmental responsibility, and also how we can join together as global citizens to make a change. And what I want to do is start off by telling you my story of why I'm on this call today. In 2006, I met this dynamic and smart woman who had a textile consulting business called Fabricology. And since that time, we worked together on several textile projects. And it was about 2 years ago when we were talking about the state of affairs of apparel and how slow progress is happening in our industry, and how exactly do we deal with such a fragmented supply chain. And we asked ourselves the question, how are we going to reduce the more than 50,000 tons of textile waste globally that happens every year? It was also around this time that I was involved in the launch and commercialization of a fiber called Refibra technology that Lenzing produces. And I could see many of the challenges that the brands and supply chains have around circularity. Then, of course, there was an additional conversation that involved a cocktail napkin with a drawing, because every good conversation requires a cocktail napkin. And it was then that I knew that Carla was right, and that we needed to really push forward in how we could collaborate and get forward and past the stalled position that we're in as an industry. And that's really how I came to get more involved in accelerating circularity and many of the ideas that Carla had started in putting the group together and getting companies around the table to figure out how we can really address the problem of circularity. So before we get started, I just want to go through a couple of housekeeping rules. So this session is being recorded, and the recording will be sent to you afterwards if you want to share it with any colleagues or friends. If everyone could stay muted, and then we will have time at the end for any questions. There's also a chat box feature, so if you're not familiar with Zoom, you will be, I'm sure, in the next couple of weeks, and you can ask your questions in the chat box, and then we will open up for questions at the end. We'll kick it off now over to Carla, and Tracy will be also managing the slides through the presentation today. So Carla, we'll get started with you.
Great, thanks Tricia. Wow, that was a really wonderful introduction. Actually, Tracy, if you want to move forward on the slides. Obviously that was Tricia's slide, and then going forward one more slide, a little bit about what we're going to talk about today. I'll give you a brief introduction on accelerating circularity and what we're doing. When we talk about intelligence, what that means, some of the research. Tracy will get into waste. She's leading the research that we're going to be doing on waste. Tricia will talk about recycling technologies, about the exciting things that Lenzing is doing and other things that are happening in that area as well. And then we're going to talk, so this was originally, the goal was to bring in brands and retailers from the city and talk about where and how important the brands and retailers are, and then we'll have a question and answer section. If we move forward in the slides, before that, I'd like to introduce Tone from Circular City Week, New York. They've done an incredible amount of work, and she just wanted to say a word or two as we get started. So, Tone.
Thank you so much, guys. And yeah, absolutely. My name is Tone Sondergaard, and I'm the director of Circular City Week, New York. And thank you so much for allowing me just to say a few very short words about what it is that we are doing. We are essentially trying to create 1 week a year where New York is buzzing around this idea of circular economy and all the potential that it has, not only within the fashion and textile industry, but that we'll be talking about today, but also in so many other sort of areas of urban life. But there would be no week if it wasn't for great hosts like you guys. So Carla and Tricia, thank you so much for hosting this, and thank you also so much for taking it online. That is not an easy task. This topic is really, really important, so I'm so happy that you're taking on talking about it, especially in a city like New York, and for all of you guys who are not in New York as well, of course. I'm also just really happy to let everyone know that we're not alone in this idea of thinking that circular economy really do have something to offer. Had Circular City Week gone ahead as scheduled, there would have been more than 50 events taking place, and we would actually have engaged more than 4,000 attendees, making it one of the biggest sort of circular economy events out there at all. So that's really amazing. But last but not least, I also just want to give a big shout out to, of course, all our hosts, all our partners, and of course, our pioneers that are enabling us to do this week, which is NYSERDA, Arab, Fresh Fields, and ING. So thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for being on this lovely call today, and I'm super excited to learn much more about textile to textile recycling. So thanks so much.
Great, thanks, Tone. If we move to the next slide, we can start. We'll spend a little bit of time on a background of accelerating circularity. What I'd like to say is, first and foremost, is that accelerating circularity is a collaborative industry project. Tricia talked about her and I meeting several years ago and developing these ideas. We brought in some additional players, which I'll refer to in a minute or two. But I just want to let you know that it is because the textile industry has this big waste problem. As you can read here, the numbers in the United States alone, it's basically 17 million tons of waste a year. Tricia talked about 50 million tons as a global number. These are staggering numbers if we could actually envision what that amount of waste looks like. And as we talk about accelerating circularity and we understand that it's an important thing for our industry to do, I'd like to also take a little bit of a step back and let you know that circularity, while it's incredibly important, it's going to allow us to deal with our textile waste. It's not going to solve all our sustainability issues. You know, we're living in a world today where we see how interconnected we all are and how everybody is a part of everything. Textile waste is an issue, but the textile supply chain is also going to affect other areas, water, chemistry, and things like that. And regardless if we're using materials that come from a circular waste stream, we're also going to have to deal with these other issues. So circularity is incredibly important from a both mechanical and chemical perspective. We at Accelerating Circularity are looking specifically at mechanical and chemical recycling from a textile to textile perspective. We're really a year and a half to 2 years into this project. We're very clear on what our strategy is and what's important. And so textile to textile is where we feel like the industry needs to focus. And we're focusing specifically on 3 fibers. We're focusing on cotton, polyester, and cellulosic materials, because when we do that, we know that we are dealing with over 80% of fibers that are used in the textile supply chain. And if we are able to do that and affect that business, we feel like we can actually achieve for the textile industry SDG 12, which is sustainable consumption and production. So that's, we feel like a pretty noble goal for the industry to achieve. So if we move on to the next slide, you can see that for accelerating circularity, our mission is to move textiles from linear to circular. And to do that, we're going to we have several steps that we're going to take. We're going to be researching, we're going to be creating maps, we're going to be identifying links and running pilots, and then reporting on this work. It's important to know, actually, we just learned today that we received our 501c3 status. We are officially a nonprofit entity, and all the work that we are doing is for the public good. So if we move on to the next slide, one of the things that we think is really important about this project is to be able to provide intelligence to not only the textile supply chain, but actually everyone, because interestingly enough, if we're going to be circular, everybody's got to be involved, from the consumer. As I've heard Tricia say a number of times, the consumers are actually going to be our suppliers of raw material. So we have on our website, and we hope everybody goes to our website, it's acceleratingcircularity.org. But on that website, we have a glossary which has information in terms of terminology that we use. One of the things that's incredibly important is that we speak using the same language, and so that when we use a term like circularity, that we are working from a common definition. In addition to that, there's industry statistics on there under the intelligence tab. We will continue to update that as we garner more information. As I said in the beginning, this is a collaborative industry project, so if people have intelligence that they believe needs to get out there, we're happy to include that. So if we move on to the next slide, we have 4 key goals in this project. We really want to define a functioning, cost-effective circular textile supply chain, and that's critically important, the term cost-effective, because if it's not, we won't be able to scale, and scaling for us is incredibly important. We want to identify the potential for commercial products based on a cost-effective supply chain. So what are those products that can really go circular? I don't think that every product that's made today has that opportunity. And we're going to provide the model for being able to implement the systems that will allow for this. And again, we're going to talk about this a lot. The results of this are removing textile waste from incineration and landfill, and also reducing the amount of virgin materials that are required. Certainly that's going to lead us to making progress on that SDG 12. So as we go forward into the next slide, project activities, we're going to be researching a number of things, from everything from textile waste, where it is, how much there is, what it is, and from very different perspectives, post-industrial, post-consumer, unsold merchandise. It's a big task. Again, if people have information or reports that they'd like to share with us, we'd certainly be happy to look at those. We'll also be researching the recycling technologies that are out in the marketplace. We have identified about 60 different technologies who are working on solutions. We will aggregate this data. We're going to map potential supply chains. If we are able to get the information, can you imagine the ability to understand where textile waste is, what kind of waste it is, and then what are the recycling technologies that are out there, and which recycling technologies can use which waste, and how that works together. We know today there are going to be some missing links in this. For instance, you know, we might know where the textile waste is, but how is it collected? How is it sorted? How do we convert those feedstocks into a form that can be used by the different recyclers? Some of those recyclers are going to take anything from spinning mill waste to actual garments. So again, knowing which waste material can be used for which recycling technology is going to be a big difference. And as I said earlier, we are a nonprofit. We're doing this for the public good. So we'll be making reports public on a regular basis. All right, next slide. So this is a supply chain map that we used. We created this graphic, and of course we had to put it into a circle. And what you see there is you can see sort of the outline of different slices of the pie. And each of those slices represents a supply chain step. And they start at resale and reuse, and they go through waste collecting, sorting, shredding, mechanical and chemical recyclers, back into fiber producers, and through the supply chain. And today you can see that on the right side, there aren't connections there. It's not to say that there aren't waste collectors, textile waste collectors, they certainly are. They haven't been connected to the traditional supply chain. So that's where we are going to play. This, what this shows us is exactly the target of our work, the focus of our work, other than resale and reuse. We see those as important elements of circularity, but there are people who are working in that field, which we're collaborating with. I'll explain that a little bit more in just a few minutes. But one thing that's potentially exciting about our work is that you can see the existing supply chain today, from fiber companies through yarn spinning, textile mills, garment making, the brands and retailers and the consumer. That's all connected, right? That supply chain exists and it works. If we're able to connect these parts of the supply chain that don't exist today or exist for different purposes, we're going to be able to move right into the existing textile supply chain, and that's going to allow circularity to scale much more quickly than other types of changes that need to happen for more sustainable products. New fibers from ag waste or food waste are exciting new developments, but those are going to take a long time, because not only are they going to have to commercialize through the existing supply chain, but also through all of the new steps as well. So we're excited that we feel like our goal is to work ourselves right into the existing supply chain so that we can scale quickly. And so if we move on to the next slide, you can see that we have created a working group. It's a very tight little group. It's not as big as some other organizations that are out there, but we feel like with this group, we're nimble enough to make decisions. We've created a strategy that we're very clear that can make progress. We have the type of companies that have the scale and the diversity of product that provide expertise in a variety of areas. We also have the whole supply chain. We've got Lensing and Unify as existing fiber suppliers. Geotex is a mechanical recycler based in Mexico. GR3N is a chemical recycling technology that's in the development stage, with people there have incredible expertise. And then we have Revolve Waste, who has expertise in understanding what's happening in the waste supply chain. So this working group has been meeting for, I think, almost 2 years now. And I think we'll continue to do and focus on this work in a way that's going to help us make progress. And if we move on to the next slide, you can see that while we're a small group, we've collaborated, we've created relationships with diverse organizations. I had mentioned that circularity is important, and there's things like reuse and repair. The Renewal Workshop is doing that kind of work. So we've partnered with them as a collaborating organization, and they're sharing information with us in terms of things like what in textile waste is appropriate for repair and reuse versus recycling. Obviously, those are better alternatives when it comes to the overall use of the product. So that kind of relationship is very important. We have relationships with US FIA, the United States Fashion Industry Association. They do a lot of work on policy. We believe very strongly that policy is going to influence the world's ability to be circular. As a nonprofit, we can't do lobbying, things like that, but we can sure pass that information on to our partner to do that. And so each of the organizations that we collaborate with have the opportunity to work with us in a way that helps us to amplify our message, exchange information, and you know, further this progress. So if we go to the next slide, we believe as this project becomes successful, that we're going to see textile to textile circular supply chains that have been mapped. We're going to highlight those missing links that need to be established, and these supply chains are going to be evaluated for efficacy. And by creating the knowledge of what is necessary, it's going to allow brands and retailers and either other people along the textile supply chain to go in and to make the connections that they need to make so that these supply chains function. And if that all happens, then as we move along, we're going to find ourselves in a world, if you move to the next slide, where we meet that SDG 12, responsible consumption and production, and we will eliminate textile waste and landfill. And that really is, when it comes down to it, the goal of the ultimate goal of this project. So we'd like to get into a little bit more detail of the work. And so as we move on, we're going to have Tracy talk about our textile waste research. Or Tracy or Trisha, who's next?
Tracy is.
Okay. Oh, she's muted. So you should be unmuted now, Tracy.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, wonderful. So as Carla said, my name is Tracy Kindon. I am here representing Revolve Waste, and I call myself a nerd, but I've spent the last 7 years of my life really understanding textile waste flows, recycling technologies, and how you get that waste out of landfill and back into the supply chain. And have been working in both Europe and the United States to really understand that problem. And so one of the most important things I think that I say at the beginning is that I've heard over and over that circularity is larger than recycling, and I absolutely agree with that statement. Certainly in the intelligence slide that Carla showed, the definition of circularity is bigger than that, but it's impossible to be circular without recycling. And if we can't recycle things economically, then circularity won't happen. And I firmly believe that if we don't understand the waste, then this future that we want, this circular industry, is not going to be possible. And so in outlining the waste research for this project, focused on a handful of things. So we have obviously 3 types of waste, as Carla said. We're looking at the 3 most important and accessible types of waste to get to. That's post-industrial, post-consumer, and unsold merchandise. We want to be able to map it to understand what the volumes are, what the flows are, and then we also want to take the time to define whether it can be recycled and who can recycle it. So those questions that Carla articulated before, the where's the waste, what is it, how much is it, who has it, all really, really important for the economics of recycling as well as the feasibility piece. That can it be recycled is another quite important thing to understand. And it plays into the economics as well as, you know, how much of what is waste can actually go into the system again today, and where do we need to be looking, what do we need to be doing to be able to get to that 100% recycled figure. The other important thing is the infrastructure to be able to take waste, to collect it where it is, to be able to sort it appropriately, and to be able to transform that waste into something that's a feedstock. Does that infrastructure exist today? Where is it? Where is it missing the links, as Carla so eloquently put? That's information that, you know, we hear these questions all the time. We don't have any really great answers. That's what the research is really designed to give us a better picture of. So again, that's the infrastructure to collect, to sort, to transport, port, and to convert. And that's a thing as a brands and retailers is really important to understand. That's as important as the recycling technology itself. Is really understanding how you get the waste back to the front end. In terms of the types of waste we're looking at, the post-industrial waste is absolutely what you think it would be. That's the yarn, the textile, any real waste that comes from manufacturing, we're lumping into this bucket of post-industrial. Post-consumer is what's coming out of consumers' homes, but also things like furniture and carpet are typically classified in post-consumer waste. One of the things that we're looking at now, as we're digging into the figures that exist for waste flows in the United States, is do we include carpet and bulky waste like furniture and mattresses in our analysis, or do we section that out, acknowledge that it exists, but treat it or think about it slightly differently? So these are the things that we're starting to look at now. In the ongoing waste research. And unsold merchandise, that's a place where it's really hard to get information. That stuff that either never hits the retail floor or comes back as a return, maybe has a slight defect, but it's somehow in the United States and can't be sold. We want to understand what it is, where it is, and how much there is. And there aren't the same types of waste characterizations for that type of item that there is for post-consumer waste. And so if you guys that are on the webinar today have a little bit of that insight that you can share, please do let us know. First and foremost, take the survey that's on the website. That would be exceptionally helpful. And if you're willing to contribute a little more information around unsold merchandise, that would be fantastic. So I think if you have questions, I think we're going to have a time at the end for that. But things to leave you with on this is that, part of the digging into the waste, as I said before, it really helps us understand where where the problems of the linear system are and what can be immediately addressed. It might be that I'm obsessed with this particular problem, but I really believe that the immediate answers to get us to that long-term goal are in the waste. That type of data that we're collecting here with this waste research is the first few stepping stones to building that circular system that includes durable products, that includes the reuse, that absolutely includes the recycling, and reducing the amount of virgin raw materials that we extract for textiles, because we can see those waste trends, we can make informed decisions, and then we can develop these circular supply chains and materials flows that really take this project and the work that follows on beyond just recycling and into a new way to move forward. So I will leave you with that, and we'll move on to the next piece. But if you have, please do go on to the website. Please do answer the survey. And if you have any information on unsold merchandise, please reach out and let us know.
Great, thank you, Tracy. Tricia, you're up.
Great. So Tracy had mentioned about how we bring textiles then back in as a feedstock. And one way of doing that is through chemical recycling. And how that works is we can actually take textile waste and make it into a pulp. For lensing, we've been manufacturing fiber for more than 80 years using pulp from trees, from wood. And so, as you know, when you're making pulp, or if you think of, when you were in summer camp and you were making paper, and you could make paper out of cellulose, and that cellulose can come from cotton scraps, could come from wood, it could come from trees, it can come from hemp. There's all different ways that you can make pulp. And so that's basically what we're doing, is that we are taking textile waste. We've used post-industrial waste as well as post-consumer waste. And what we've done then is make that into a pulp. For lensing, I guess we could use our Refibra technology kind of as a case study of how we've done this. And we launched Refibra in 2017. At that time, we used 20% post-industrial, 100% cotton waste. And it was dyed waste. So it was cutting room scraps, basically, that we were able to work with some of our brand partners in order to collect, and then we'd make that into pulp. And we'd use that as feedstock with our wood pulp, mixing the two pulps together in order to then add the solvent and extrude the fiber. So now in 2020, we are at a point of using 30% mix of post-industrial and post-consumer waste. This also is 100% cotton waste. So we have to use 100% cotton. If we use any synthetics, that will not work through our system, our production system. So I think when we look at some of the challenges of multi-fiber blends that we have, especially blends with spandex, this is something that we face. With this, we take the pulp, and as you can see from the diagram, the infographic on the right-hand side, we mix those pulps together. So when we can take the waste all the way back to the pulp stage, it supports to create a better quality in the fiber, because you are bringing it all the way back to its original state and then starting over again. So this does not make a fiber that is any weaker, or it doesn't have any difference in the hand than you would a virgin fiber. So we have the same strength, the same aesthetics, the same dyeing capabilities as virgin tensile lyocell. When we mix the two pulps, we add the solvent. For lensing, we focus on using our lyocell technology because we also have a closed loop and we have circularity in the production process. So in manufacturing lyocell, the solvent is reused at a rate of over 99.5%. When we have the solvent stage with the pulp, we also add a fiber identification. And I think this is also going to be very important, is the traceability and the transparency around circularity and circular textiles. So when we add that fiber identification, we can assure that it is using Refibra technology, that it is using textile to textile recycling, whether it's in a yarn, fabric, or garment stage. And with this, we can give a certification to the garment maker or the fabric mill that it is using Refibra. So then what we do is we sell the Refibra technology fiber to yarn spinners, and they blend it with any other fibers. So typically we saw that we could blend the mix of Refibra technology with mechanically recycled fibers, and it helps to provide additional strength to the yarn. As I mentioned, we launched this in 2017, and through that time, we worked with our global supply chain partners to develop fabrics that are knits, wovens, denim, and also in home applications. And the first programs that were launched, I would say that those retailers and brands continue today. So it's nice to see this continuation in the market. And some of the programs that you find are at Banana Republic, Closed, Eileen Fisher, Guess, Kings of Indigo, Levi's, Reformation. These are just some of the brands globally that are using Refibra. And what we've done is work with these brands to educate and communicate to the consumer what it is. And I think that's very important. And this is one thing that I've found over the past several years is, how do you educate that textile waste isn't considered garbage? And how do you kind of educate the consumer then that, they can purchase something that still is of quality and value that is from a recycled product. For lensing, our vision is to increase the amount of post-consumer waste, cotton waste in Refibra, to get to 50% by 2024. And what we've been doing is gradually introducing, more post-consumer waste. We realize that this is the direction to bring true circularity in. And as Carla mentioned in the beginning, we reach a point where the consumer becomes our raw material supplier. And this is what really closes the loop there, and then the missing links in order to get it to us. So I think, this has been a very interesting program and business development project that I've been involved in. I think there's also a need for additional education within the brands, so that designers understand how to work with a product that is coming from a circular supply chain, and also that there's additional marketing communications around it and goals that are set by retailers and brands to bring more circularity. Even small steps can add, quite a bit in savings around that 50,000 tons of textile waste globally. So for Lensing, we support additional partners that can join us, whether it's on the supply chain side or retailers and brands, and certainly how we can connect more with the collectors and sorters to bring textile waste back into the supply chain. Great.
Thanks, Teresa.
Next. Yes.
Yeah, next slide. So the next slide, there is a link. Now, if you recall, we were all supposed to be there together and in the Lensing showroom, but we thought we would try this anyway. So if this is the brand and retailer survey, the reason that we're having these surveys, it's a first step for us to go in and to understand more about where different segments of the marketplace are. So actually, on our website, there's the brand and retailer survey, which is live. This survey here, we'd love for everybody on the phone to go to that website, take it now. Trisha will talk to everybody with, ask you what questions you have, and she can walk you through that. But if you would take this survey while you guys are talking about questions that you might have based on what we've gone over today, I'll sort of aggregate the answers from the surveys that you folks are taking. It's a quick survey. I think there are 10 or 11 questions, but we're doing one for brand and retailers, which was, the people that we had asked to come to this event today. And then there is also on the website, there is a recycling technology survey. There will also be up and running, which they're not live yet, surveys for post-industrial waste, post-consumer waste, and unsold merchandise. We're actually going to have a special one for industrial laundries and uniform, because that's a very different marketplace compared to other businesses. So I hope that you'll all weigh in. And
Carla, can you, there were some requests on the chat. Can you put the link into the chat box?
Let's see. Actually,
I don't have it. I can't pull it from the slide like that.
Oh, hold on a second. You know what? I know where I can pull it from.
Okay.
I think I know where I can pull it from. I will try and pull that now.
And if you are in the supply chain, if you're not a brand or retailer, Carla, what do you suggest for, there's other surveys. Is there information on this survey for supply chain?
There is a recycler survey. There's going to also be a, like I said, there'll be some other surveys. Okay, so there, the link is there in the chat box, so you can click on it. And if, I'm sorry if you're not a brand or retailer and you're not a recycling technology right now, come back. And when the other surveys are open, which will, I think all of the surveys will probably be up and running. Tracy, when would we say we get those waste surveys up on the website running? Oh, I think Tracy's on mute again. There you are. Tracy, you're unmuted.
They should be ready in a week or two. When I mute myself, I can't unmute myself. I guess I need to stop doing that. Yeah, they'll be up very soon and within the next week or so.
Great. So if anybody has questions, Tricia, you want to take that over and we'll see who's, I hope you guys are going in and answering the survey.
Yeah, should we give a couple of minutes to complete the survey and then we'll start with some questions?
Sure.
Okay.
I think there might be some questions in the chat box already.
Yeah, there are some. There are some.
Okay, great.
Yeah. I feel like we should be playing some music now, but I'll refrain from singing.
Soon, but I can't.
Yeah.
I could sing some terrible elevator music.
Yeah.
Really good at that.
Just imagine you're in the Lensing showroom, which is really pretty. You've got a drink in your hand. You're on your phone. Yes, and you should just answer the parts of the survey that are relevant to you. That's fine.
Great. We'll give you a couple of minutes to complete that. If you're not completing the survey, it's a great chance to check out the Accelerating Circularity website, or you can also look at the LinkedIn page and join the LinkedIn page. There's a LinkedIn page as well as a group. So if you want to have more dialogue, you can join the group, share articles, or otherwise you can check out the page and follow.
And we also have a Twitter account, which is actually I'll put that in the chat box too. So before we came on, we were actually chatting for those and having people introduce themselves. I've got about 11 surveys in.
Oh, great. Wonderful. Good. I just added the LinkedIn page if anybody wants to go there. And Carla, let me know when we want to go through some of the questions.
Yeah, why don't you go through some of the questions and then I'll hopefully we'll get a few more responses in and then I'll send those on.
Great. Great. Well, I'm going to mention here that David Bennell included a link here on some of the work that he's been doing around circular transition. David, I don't know if you want to mention anything more about that other than the link.
We've got to unmute him.
Okay.
Hold on a second if I can find him. David, you're unmuted.
Oh, good.
David.
Thank you. Hi, everybody.
David.
Hi, friends.
Hey.
Hi. Hey. Yeah, very long story short, WBCSD's Circular Economy Project has put together this, I'll call it metrics guide. And please message me. My information's in the chat box. There's way too much to talk about in it, but all to say, Carla, just to connect through to your point, and Tricia, you too, a number of your suppliers and partners are active in this. So I know way too smart to reinvent the wheel and already way ahead of this. So please reach out to me if you'd like to be connected to them. And also just to mention, we also host the Alliance to End Plastic Waste. That's a $1 billion fund, actually 1 billion plus now to do exactly what the title says. So also can connect you through to those folks if and when it's appropriate and timely. Thanks.
Great. Thanks for sharing that information. Good. And then Lisa's question of anything to connect circular textiles to localized small batch demand chains. Refashioned has been mapping those systems and innovations for the last 5 years. Carlo, did you want to address that?
Sure. We're actually, one of the things that we didn't mention is we're very specific on what we're doing and where we're looking. And so when we're doing the waste research, we're looking specifically on the East Coast of the United States at very specific population centers. And the reason is that waste is local. And so our work on waste will be local to the East Coast of the United States. I don't know if, I think from your question that maybe you're talking about even smaller circles than that, but we're focused on the East Coast of the United States in terms of what we're doing. That's when we're looking at waste. When we're looking at recycling technologies, we're looking at those on a global scale because the technologies can be licensed to different in different geographies and things like that. And I know that a lot of these new technologies that are being developed are being developed with the idea in mind that they might be able to be licensed so that they can sit next to an existing plant. And then also when it comes to where we see these new circular products being made, we look at those as being made ideally either in the United States or we've opened it up to the Western Hemisphere. We do talk a lot about scale, and that has a tendency to be more of the focus of this business, although we believe that all examples of circularity are steps, progress in the move, and they'll certainly have the ability to teach us things.
Great. Great. There's a couple of Refibra questions, so I'm going to cluster those together. Thanks, Christine, for your comment on Refibra, the sustainable and traceable fibers. Thank you. Christy, you asked, can rayon post-industrial and post-consumer waste be used for Refibra? Technically, it can because it's cellulose back into cellulose. However, due to quantity of waste, we are using 100% cotton at this time. So the technology exists, yes, to use rayon, modal, or lyocell within that, but because 25% of all fibers that are produced are cotton, that are used, globally are cotton, there's more availability of cotton waste in the market. My sense is that in the future, and there are some other technology players that are working with man-made cellulosics. So it can be done, but we are focusing right now on the waste that is available in cotton. Another Refibra question here from Julia. Should Refibra only be blended with 100% cotton fibers to ensure its circularity? No, I mean, Refibra now is blended with cotton. There's a lot of denim applications where it's blended also with recycled polyester and also with spandex. So this is where I would say we have to work more in circularity for its next life, right? So we have the garment or the textile waste going through its first life, and then moving into the next and the next. So it doesn't have to only be blended with cotton. It's a good blending partner with cotton, but it doesn't have to be. And this is where we'll also have to see that fiber separation technology or how we can work together with having fibers that are cellulosic. So an all cellulosic blend could work back into circularity. But I think this is all as we get into scaling textile to textile circularity and as we get to understand more of that. So then we have another question here from Carla. Using post-consumer yarns in our product, simply de-knitting and re-knitting. With your current challenge in finding out what kind of toxins may be left over after consumer use, or even post-industrial that may have been left over for years before stricter regulation was passed. How to handle that, any advice? I don't know, Tracy, do you have any comments on this?
Oh, I knew that was coming.
Yeah, that was for you. Yeah.
Yeah, of course, of course. I will give the political answer first. The political answer is if those garments were made from, or if the textile was made to comply with certain chemical standards in the first place, REACH compliance in Europe, RSLs for various the brands and retailers have standards, I think, in California, et cetera, then theoretically they shouldn't contain those hazardous chemicals. Some of the work that's happening right now, a project being done by, I believe it's H&M and IKEA and a group of others, is finding that mechanically recycled, there could be potentially certain chemistries in there, and really what's coming out. So the non-political answer is what's coming out is we just don't have enough data to know for sure whether there are chemicals of concern in textiles that already exist in the world or not. But the thing to remember is while it's not a perfect answer and a perfect solution, the clothes that you go buy and wear are already in the market. That sweater that you're pulling apart that there's some concern about whether or not it has chemistry, questionable chemistry in there. These are products that are on the market today. And so the question that we need to ask as an industry is, what are we putting into products to begin with, to make sure that that chemistry is just not, those chemicals of concern just are not in there. And I think one of the important things to remember with the developing recycling technologies, or technologies like the fiber that have been on the market for some time, they're being held to a pretty high standard in terms of chemical safety. So, I believe that the chemical recycling technologies that are that exist at commercial scale, that few handful, and those that are to come, are really going to need to be compliant and putting out fiber that is safe. I don't know that we'll ever be able to understand completely all the chemistry that's in the stuff that already exists, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't recycle it. It means that we should really be aware of what's going through the processes that is being recycled, what's coming out the other end, and what's going on in the recycling process to make sure that there isn't chemistry leaking out. That's one of the pieces of chemical cellulosic recycling in the industry leaders, is that they take great care to have a closed loop system. And so that's another way to start to handle some of those chemistry concerns, both in the processing of the fibers, and then, higher standard on outputs for recycling will also help that chemistry issue in the future, if it is an issue.
Great.
Seem to be running a little short on time here.
Yep, I've got two more, looks like 2 or 3 more questions here. So real quick on pre-consumer inventories, this is information that we will be sharing. So as Carla said, it's open source on the information. So please check back with us on that. Any research on greenhouse gas emissions? And the take on the Qantas measuring fashion report indicating that recycling will not significantly reduce climate impact. It tends to repeat the most emissions in water intensive stages of the initial production. Carla, did you have any comment on the Qantas report?
Sure, a couple of things. One of the things that's a little unfortunate about where we are today in sustainability is there are a multitude of reports out there, some of them coming up with information that's contradictory. So there are reports that say that, like the Qantas report, that the bulk of our emissions are coming from dyeing and finishing. Dyeing and finishing is also a function of raw material choices. And so I think that we have to be careful when we look at certain things. The other thing is there's a very big difference. We use the term recycling a little bit loosely, which I think sometimes isn't a good thing. And, you know, if we talk about circularity, we're looking at something that we want to go through a continuous circle. If you're talking about recycling today, I mean, it's a word that got, you know, in a sense, bastardized, right? Because recycling should mean that something goes around and around. But today, what recycling means is it gets used once, it goes through a loop, and then it goes right into landfill or incineration. What we're looking to do is to create systems that's going to allow for continuous recycling, and that will change things. We are also, as I had mentioned earlier, talking with other organizations, one of which is AII, and AII works specifically on water, chemicals, and energy, so that when we start to run our pilots with our products, that we understand that these are other important elements of the sustainability journey. I also mentioned that early on, is that any one step is not going to fix everything, and that collaboration and the connection of everything that we do is not, there's nothing in a silo that, you know, is perfect all on its own.
Great. Yeah, and then there's a question here from Julia on separation of polyester for its next life. There are different technologies that are developed, some at, you know, more of a lab scale, that are working at the fiber separation. Carl, I don't know if you want to elaborate on any Titan or Hong Kong Rita or any of those.
Yeah, there certainly are technologies out there that are focusing specifically on the ability to be able to deal with mixed waste streams. And so there's a variety of them. They run the gamut from, like Tricia just mentioned, Titan Biosciences, Warren Again, HK Rita. All of those different recycling technologies are focusing on the ability to work with fiber blends, and some with more or less the ability to also deal with spandex in those fiber blends. I think it's also GR3N has the ability to take certain types of blends. So
great.
Those are all things that we're going to be working on, and will be a part of the reporting, which recycling technology has the opportunity to work with various different waste streams with
great
materials involved.
And another part of the reporting which Julia asked here, and Faith, you got back to her on where consumers in America can donate garments, you know, so looking beyond Goodwill. So this is also a part of some of the information that we're collecting on post-consumer garment collection. And Amanda, thanks for your comments here on chemical recycling to eliminate some of the hazardous chemicals. And yes, more research is needed. And I think that's a lot of where the industry is at right now. And that's where we want to collect a lot of this information together. Holly, thanks for highlighting Officina 39, who are using cotton waste in order to make dye stuffs. So they are using this, and actually it's been combined with some of our Refibra product. If you want to know more about Officina, you can look at their website. They're based in Italy. And I think that was most. There's some other links on here if people want to look. There's another report from Textile Exchange. It's the MCI Insight report. It's coming out mid-April. There will be another resource report, but there's some information on benchmark data of circularity that Corey is listing here. And then Lisa included some information on refashioned. But I think we've covered most of the comments and questions that are on here.
Great, thanks, Tricia. So just quickly before we sign off, we've had some answers in the survey, and I appreciate everybody who's filling it out. And hopefully, you know, if you didn't have time to fill it all out now. If you could do that later. So just as sort of a quick thing, we had 6 brands, some women's clothing companies, sports and outdoor people, a couple home textiles, children, some others, not sure what others are. And then the people, 3 people who told us where they were, their volumes under $500,000, $500 million. There are quite a few people who talked, who answered the survey have a take back program. A couple of them have mail-in, some of them are in-store. Not everybody answered everything. We manage it versus collector sorter. These are just very, obviously it's a small sample, but it just kind of gives us an idea. Where do the take backs go? Some of these things, looks like the winner here was resold at retail, and then people are also selling them, and then people are collecting them at DCs, because I think that, you know, we know that people, not everybody knows where to put them. The highest volumes are sort of not unexpected. Their cotton was #1, followed by actually other poly blends, and then polyester. And circular strategies, a lot of, you know, of our number, of our small sample here, the most people were talking about was design for extended product life, which is, I think, a very noble and right answer. And then people are looking at new business models, and I think that's something that's really important, generally speaking. Other things, what's preventing circularity? Collection, and I think we'd agree with you there. We need to have more understanding of that. Mixed fiber blends, that was brought up today in the conversation, and then the recycling technologies, and we really need to get more of them up and running and commercial, as is Refibra. People who are working, of people that are on the phone, you know, there are 6 of them that are actually in some kind of working group that's working to improve, you know, make progress on circularity. And most of those people are looking at post-consumer textiles. I see that more than the post-industrial or the unsold merchandise. And then the feedstocks, again, it goes back to cotton and polyester as the primary. Wool got a couple of mentions here, and that's interesting because wool, especially in the mechanical recycling, is probably the oldest form of circularity that we know of today. And then we looked at what products could be sourced in the Western Hemisphere, and denim and t-shirts were the top 2 products. And that's important because if we're going to look at our waste availability here and what we can do with it, I think that's important. And lastly, which I think is really interesting, of all the people that answered, many people didn't put in no, but many people didn't answer that. But of all the people that answered, 11 people said that they would support legislation for circularity. So I think that gives us an idea of some work that needs to be done in addition to the research and mapping that we're doing. So we'd like to thank everyone for joining us today. We'd like you to stay involved. There's also an opportunity on the website to put your information in there if you would like to stay on our mailing list and up to date with what we're doing. We'll be sending out reports and newsletters. Tricia and Tracy, is there anything you'd like to say as we close?
No, I want to again thank everyone for joining today, and that we were able to continue this dialogue. I think, you know, there's so much happening these days, and it's good when we have comfort in continuing our work, and look forward to more discussions and more in collaboration with everyone. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you guys very much.
All right. Have a good evening.
Thanks.
Day. Thank you. Bye-bye.